My guest today is Janice Gobert. She's a friend of mine that I've known for a long time, and I'm excited for today's conversation, Janice, because we met before the company was a company, when it was still an idea, still in development, still coming to be real. And now you have clients, you're running it, it's a business. So I can't wait to catch up and hear what all's happened since then. But I think before we go down that road, just what is Apprendis? What does it do? Why did you create it? Why does the company exist? And what do you guys do, first of all, just so everyone knows what we're talking about for the rest of the time?
Yeah, thanks. Thanks for having me. So Apprendis, the name, comes from the verb apprendre, which is French, which means to learn. It also means to learn in Latin, Spanish, Italian, many languages. And because we're a learning tech company, it seemed like a really good name. So that's why we chose Apprendis. I formed the company with two former graduate students of mine from WPI, Mike Sao Pedro, who's the CTO, and Cameron Betts, who's our managing director. And we really formed the company because there was a real push on innovation and tech transfer here at WPI when I used to be a professor. And, we had some ideas. And also the U.S. Department of Education and the National Science Foundation also were very interested in us productizing what we have for helping students and teachers enact the next generation science standards, which is now sort of accepted in 40 plus states in the United States.
And what do you mean by what you have, productizing that? What was it that you had?
Right. So what we have on what we've developed, and we have patented technology on, 3 or 4 patents now, is software that does real-time assessment of students' competencies at doing science, how they form hypotheses, how they collect data, how they interpret data, how they warrant their claims, how they describe their experiments. And so while they're working in a virtual environment, we're tracking everything they do, every mouse click, every selection, everything they type, everything the choices they make, etc. While they work, real-time machine-learned algorithms are extracting, distilling log files, and then creating actionable data points for the teacher, actionable alerts for the teacher, but also personalizing the experience to the student. So it's like, Johnny, you're not testing the hypothesis you said you were going to test, right? Because real-time instruction is really important to deep learning.
For sure. I mean, yeah. So when it's happening in real time, how is the information relayed when we know Johnny needs extra attention or Johnny needs to move to the next level, or how does the teacher know?
Right. So Inkits is the name of the student platform. Inkits is logging everything in real time, and then Rex, who's a pedagogical agent, digital agent, jumps up on the screen and might say, Johnny, you're not testing the hypothesis you said you were going to test. Or, Johnny, you're changing too many variables at once. Or, Johnny, how will you know about the effects of X on Y when you change so many variables across trials?
So like a virtual tutor helping Johnny move through the exercise? So
a virtual tutor, but also now our teacher platform, which is our newest invention called Ink Blotter, gives this actionable alerts on a dashboard that's on an iPad or iPhone.
For the teacher?
For the teacher.
Okay.
The teacher can literally walk around the class and see, Johnny needs help because Johnny doesn't understand the difference between an independent and a dependent variable.
Yeah.
Wow, 70% of my class is having that trouble right now. Stop the class.
Sure.
So
Let's
she
teach
or
it.
he can stop the class before kids get down the road collecting all this data that's not even relevant to the hypothesis they specified.
That's really cool. What age group kids are we talking about?
So we started with middle school, and we go up now through mid-high school. And we've done a little bit of, backtracking into elementary, but mostly middle school and 9th and 10th grade.
Okay, yeah, that's really cool.
For science, this is all science.
It's a part of learning for every student. They need some science background, right? And I think you could probably apply it to things outside of science too, no? The technology, the way that you help the children move along.
Well, yes. Maybe
yes. Down the road, just theoretically, if it's building them through the idea and then the execution, you could break it apart a different way if it were, say, for writing or language.
Yeah, and we do score their writing using natural language processing algorithms as well and compare it to what they do, which is a newest one of the newest innovations that we have.
What do you hear from teachers?
So teachers absolutely love this product.
I imagine, because Johnny probably doesn't want to raise his hand if he's
Correct.
having difficulty, right?
Yes, you're absolutely correct, especially in middle school and high school.
I mean, we were all Johnny sometimes, and we all didn't want to raise our hand.
Of course.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to say, I need help.
Right.
So now the teacher can say, okay, I'm going to let Rex get him, or you know what, I might walk over because I haven't been there yet today, right?
Yeah, that's really cool.
Teachers have literally called me on my cell phone and said, hey, because my number's on the website, and say, hey, I used this technology for the first time today, and it was the best instructional experience of my life.
How are they finding it? Like, I guess the question behind my question is, schools are really governed, or really tightly governed in what they put in the classrooms, right? So how do you help get it into the schools? Do you have to go through the school board? Do you have teachers that advocate for it and bring it forward?
Yeah, there's multiple pathways. We offer free trials, and then, hope that those teachers become champions for us. We have sales. We've actually touched down in 50 states now.
No kidding.
In terms
That's awesome.
of research, trials, and sales. We have a very low churn rate, so we're very excited about that. So we get some teachers as champions. Sometimes someone at the district might reach us. Sometimes someone at the state might reach us. A variety of ways. We go to these teacher conferences. We have a booth there typically. Lots of different ways.
When you have the booth and you're talking, is it teachers that you're talking? Is it mainly teachers that would then
go
advocate to not just go, but like, are you talking with administrators or primarily teachers to then bring the conversation to
Both.
Administrators? Yeah,
both.
So however you can start the conversation.
Correct.
Yeah. Makes sense. It's a long process to get into a classroom, or if you do the free trial, does it help?
The free trial helps. It's a very long sales cycle. Education is long.
I bet it is, because not only does it just take long to move the pieces, but you're hoping they vet everything pretty carefully because it's going to be teaching children.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the whole process is a little bit lengthy. Mm-hmm. But that being said, when districts want it, they move pretty quick.
That's good. I mean, it's cool to see you touch down in all 50 states. I mean, that's a lot of movement. That's really excellent.
Yes. Some international work too, and starting to touch down in different countries, which is really exciting.
Before we go deeper into that, I want to rewind, because you guys, you came together different than the storybook startup most people talk about, being that you came together on a campus with two of your former students, right? Who I've met. They're both
Correct.
great guys.
Yeah.
So it wasn't the classic Silicon Valley tech startup story, right? It's a professor and then two of your former teachers, students, and you guys. How does it go from, them and they're your students, and that their strengths, like one being technologically sound, or and I don't remember Cameron's background, but was it Cameron?
Correct.
Right.
But he also is a computer science background.
So they're both strong computer science.
Yeah.
So how does that start? Do you guys just have an idea that you start kicking around in a classroom? Do you, how does it even start to have the conversation to then snowball into an idea and a prototype and a company?
Right. Well, this is part of a sort of a longer story, but so I had been funded.
I want to actually see how it came to life.
Oh, okay, cool. So I'd been funded by the National Science Foundation in the 90s. I started with my first work with the National Science Foundation and had a good history of grants through them. And then I started in on grants with the U.S. Department of Education. Now, both the NSF and the U.S. Department of Education have the SBIR program, Small Business Innovation Research programs, where they're trying to take up their portfolio of projects that are developed in universities and spin them out into, products.
Sure.
To make it sustainable.
Mm-hmm.
And, this was tech transfer offices sprung up in universities all over the place once the Bayh-Dole Act of 1980, came into effect. So anyway, there was an interest in us productizing what we had because we had really nice effects. They loved the machine learning aspect of it. And they saw it as something with legs, I think, so they had a couple conversations with me about that. I was very interested in it because I'm a fairly pragmatic individual. And not all academics are pragmatic, which is fine. But I'm a fairly pragmatic individual. And the lofty theories that happen in academia, about education and the reality of regular classrooms is very different and can be very different. And I think in that field in particular, there's too much of a chasm, right? Like, think about research in medicine. It's not like we have a new treatment for cancer that's discovered in some university and it takes 10 years to roll out.
Right.
I don't think that's true.
Right. We hope not.
I could be wrong, but I don't think it's true, right?
Right.
So education, there tends to be too much of a lag time for my personal,
For the idea to be in the classrooms?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And the thing is,
well, it's notoriously slow, right?
It's slow. And the other thing is that some of the publishing companies are not necessarily putting out materials that are, based on solid research and theoretical framing.
Yep.
And so that's why there's a real need here to productize things that are research-based.
Well, you can see, anyone that pays any attention can see how slow at least in public schools, how slow the machine works, right? My kids brought home from, I don't know, whatever section of class, my kids are elementary school, but they brought home the old food pyramid. That's not even approved anymore by the FDA, and the school's teaching it. It's I don't know why they haven't been given a new one. They didn't get a new PDF. I don't know what it is, but you see that come home and you're like, what's the rest of the stuff they're going over all day?
Right.
So yeah, it's that's why I was so curious about how hard it is for you to get in the classroom, because it's a notoriously slow grind.
Teachers are desperate for this kind of technology.
The teachers want to teach.
The teachers are desperate for it, and I think that administrators are pretty responsive to teachers wanting the product. At least that's my experience. And when we trial in a school, what we often do, and this doesn't typically involve me, although it sometimes might, is go over the data with the teacher and the administrator. And the administrator says, oh my God, here's these students from special education who are getting incredibly strong at something that they were really poor at.
Yeah, and we didn't know how to fix.
Right, and typically with, strategy training software, just kind of a writ large, the skilled kids get even better, and the kids who are not skilled kind of...
The gap widens.
The gap can widen, and they just peter along. Whereas our results for special education population are actually really nice. So that's great, right?
That is great.
I'm a former school psychologist, so I really, the whole reason I'm in this business is that I recognize the learning difficulties that many, many students have, and they can be extremely strong in one respect or along the lines of these science practices that are part of the next generation science standards that I referred to, forming a hypothesis, collecting data, doing the experiment, interpreting data, warranting their claims, and then writing in what's called a claim evidence reasoning statement now what you have discovered during your experiment or verified during your experiment. So part of our technology is, and this really is a very intuitive point, but part of our technology can identify those kids who are really good at the doing of science, but then they get to the point where they have to articulate in words what they have understood, and they fall down on the job.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
Now, from the teacher's assessment point of view, that student will be a false negative if the teacher's relying on what the kid is writing, the student is writing.
Yep.
Conversely, you could have a kid who's just parroting what he's read or heard, right? And writing that, and he's a false positive.
Without internalizing any piece of it.
The teachers, we have data that shows that students do that and they don't even have the data they're talking about. Literally don't even have the data that they're talking about. So I wrote about this in U.S. News and World Report about the gaps at the tails, right? Your science, call him a science genius who can't articulate what he knows in words, but he can do all these really rich and deep things in the doing of science, forming hypotheses, collecting data, interpreting data, etc., versus the kid who is just parroting, right? And that's why our international comparison scores are actually quite poor. So you have a lot of superficial learning. So our technology is not designed for the teacher to go over to a student and say, hey, I gotcha, you must have been cheating, right? I really hope it's not being used that way. But for the teacher to say, hey, Judy, or hey, Sammy, right? You wrote some scientifically accurate things here, Now let's go back and pair it with a rich experiment to tie that sort of experiential knowledge to what you've written. Mm-hmm. And with the other student, the quote unquote science genius, right? It's like, wow, look how well you've done. She can show him on the iPad, on the scoring that she's getting in real time, the assessment. Look how well you've done all these aspects. Now what we need to, get better at is forming your claim evidence reasoning statement in the writing, that you have all the other pieces. And so getting back to administrators and teachers, they love this because they actually have to submit scores for students' competencies on these different practices. And so they really need a way to assess students, right?
Yeah, and they can start to see gaps.
And they can see the gaps.
More than, maybe I'm being the optimist that I am, but more than they need a way to assess students, they want to teach the students. And if you can see the gaps, you can see where you need to teach, where you need to supplement their education and make the better rounded kid, right?
Right. And in our alerting platform, they get an actionable alert. So it's not just, Adam's having this problem. It's Adam's having this problem because he doesn't understand the difference between an independent or dependent variable, because he's interpreting the independent variable in the table and not the dependent variable in the table.
Well, and he's having it now. You can go intervene and you can talk with them and help Adam figure out how to do something differently or look at the problem a different way. And I think that's really important. You don't get a month-end report that says, which is still good, and you can still help move them forward when you find out he or her needs this work. But if you can go interrupt the now and do some active learning, I think that for me, that's much more efficient for me to learn.
Of course. And so this whole approach is called performance assessment. And when you think about it, right, if you were like tennis, getting coaching on your tennis, you wouldn't say, well, remember like 3 weeks ago when you put your arm too far back? Like that would just be crazy. Right. It's kind of a funny analogy, but it makes sense.
It does. So you mentioned that you were a school psychologist.
Right. I was trained as a school psychologist at McGill when I went to grad school there.
And you were also, I don't know, what's your PhD in?
Cognitive science.
And at WPI, you were working in
learning sciences,
right,
and social science, and computer science. I was cross-appointed, and
then CEO of Apprendis, helping people learn. So it's a lot of hats. Is kind of what I was digging out.
Right.
Do you think that lends towards the entrepreneurial life, or at least the always after new things? Would you say that's part of your personality? I know it is for me. I need to be chasing shiny new things once in a while too.
Right. Well, there's a real. Everything is under the same rubric for me.
Sure, but any one of them could have been a lifelong career and fulfilling for a lot of people. Like you could have been a school psychologist, you could be a tenured professor, you could be the founder of a business, but you're all three in a row there.
Right. Well, that takes a special kind of crazy. But yeah, I wouldn't say I get bored easily, but I like to move the needle to the next level.
You like to fill time? I don't mean that in a useless way. I mean that some people really value downtime. Me, I personally don't. I value being busy. I don't like to do busy work, but I like to be busy. I like to be working on something, whether it's a personal hobby or playing with my kids or a sport or my job or my work here. But I like to be actively engaged with something. Downtime doesn't relax me. It more freaks me out.
Yeah, I don't need much downtime. Like recharging my battery, that happens very fast for me.
Yeah. I almost feel recharged by doing things. Like that's what makes me feel better.
Right.
Yeah.
So.
Do you, it's such a interesting part with the multiple jobs. That part fascinates me. And I know that they all kind of intertwine and play together. But I'm going to rewind. So back to coming up with Apprendis. So Apprendis doesn't exist, and you're talking to Mike and Cam. How does it go from not being a thing to having the information that people want to productize? And how long does it take? Like, is it a discussion and then some data points and a couple experiments, or does it take some time and you're proving theories? Like, how do you go to the point where you're like, we have something that we can create here?
Right. Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and one which I could give you an extremely long answer, but I won't. I'll give you kind of a medium long answer. So I had been doing work in this area for quite a long time. And this area, I mean people's use of simulations in science to understand science. Mm-hmm. and tracking using the log files that are generated, like the cookies that your computer
Sure.
generates, but very, very fine-grained. I had been doing work on log files for a very long time, since even 2001, something like that. I mean, very long time.
Yeah.
And because I'm a cognitive scientist, process data is really what we're interested in. And so I was recruited to WPI. I came here and ended up, co-founding the Learning Sciences program here. And because my interest and my expertise was in how people learn from very rich simulations in science, and the need for assessment data, it kind of coalesced into developing something that was really innovative. And, I have a very techie mind, even though I'm not a computer scientist by training. I have
Is it just something you really have always been drawn to? So you kind of brought the two together?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I had worked with technical people since the late 90s, when I used to be at Concord Consortium as a senior research scientist. So, working with technical people and thinking about things in very fine-grained detail, right, is something that, lends itself well to operationalizing variables at a very fine-grained level.
Yeah.
So then,
The details.
I had grants, and I realized, wow, we could really productize something here. And the U.S. Department of Education was simultaneously interested in us potentially doing that. So, going to, say, their principal investigators meeting, as I just did last week, they would have these sessions where they would talk with people like me who had series of grants saying, what do you have to productize? We want to productize to make things sustainable for teachers and students, rather than a grant ending and then the technology goes down. The teacher logs on in September and goes, oh no,
Right.
where's that technology? I love that.
Yeah.
Right? I used it for 5 years. Well, it's gone.
Yeah.
So the U.S. government does not have really, they have an interest in productizing those things to make it sustainable for teachers and students. And they
that makes
recognize
sense.
that.
So that there's someone with a reason to keep it going. I mean, it's from a business standpoint, it makes sense.
Right.
Do you think, as you start to think about productizing it and putting it together, was there an advantage, disadvantage, being that you were on a campus and you're on an innovative school that has a technical background to the school here at WPI? Was there an advantage to getting people together, to creating like the first iteration of what a product might be, or was it like holding you back? Was there a difference, like the coming from the campus environment? And I know we talked a little bit beforehand, and we'll talk again about going from that startup phase to running the business is different, and most people want to replace the professor. But before you get to that point in creating it, was there an advantage to being in an EDU environment?
Oh, yeah.
And what is it? Because I don't come from that background.
Yeah, absolutely. There was an advantage to being on a campus, and this campus in particular, I think, because here, one of the things that WPI is extremely good at is the intersection of technology with social sciences and biological sciences, et cetera. In fact, every student here as an undergrad has to do a project that's society, science, and technology together, right? And they have to do that. So I got all these undergrads who wanted to do this. And, I had graduate students from computer science, some of whom, like Mike Salpedro, moved over and actually has a PhD in learning sciences instead of computer science. So being on a campus like this, I think, really helped me do that.
I imagine so. And that's really cool that WPI has them do that. I mean, it's kind of like maybe you won't dedicate your career to the greater good, but you're going to have to think about it before you start your career.
Right.
That's pretty, I didn't know that. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
It'd be a good thought exercise.
Yeah. WPI definitely has a real strength in that area. And, this is a small undergraduate institution, primarily undergraduate institution. But, the thing about undergrads is they're really all in, when they're in it, they're all in.
Yeah. And they're not going anywhere.
Yeah. They're really excited by it.
Well, they're going somewhere when they're done.
Grad students are too. Right?
Yeah.
But, so it's been, some people like Michael Brigham, he works for he works for me now, but he did this project that I was talking about. He did his project with me. Raha Musavi is a PhD student, former PhD student of mine, is now has a full-time job at MIT. She was with me as an undergrad doing one of these projects, these science, technology, and society projects. Went to Brown, did her master's, and came back and did her PhD with me.
That's cool.
Right?
I met some of that. I don't know if I met her, but I met some of your PhD team, and they were all like really. That struck me. I mean, this was years ago, but they were all really into it. Like you guys,
Yeah.
it almost felt like you were it's a lame example, but it almost felt like you were this little startup company. Like there was an energy to it as opposed to an academic classroom or something.
Yeah, I think that's a something that is not a trivial aspect of starting a business or running a team, is that you have to leverage, you can't take people where they don't want to go. So you have to look at what their goals are, look at what their background is and their skill set, and look at where they want to go as well as where you want to go, and dovetail those things together, because you cannot take people where they don't want to go. They will,
And you don't want to be dragging people, kicking and
and I
screaming
don't want
on
to
your
drag
team.
people.
Right.
Exactly. So one of the things that I think is really, I won't say unique about my group, but is when people come to it, they immediately feel it, is that we are super tight. Everybody's super tight. Everybody's very creative. And
Open. I can attest to it because I met him and I felt that.
Yeah, very open. And the other thing is that because we have such an interdisciplinary team from, computer science, teachers, graphic designers, psychologists, former teachers, mathematicians. I mean, we have a very, very broad team. You have to respect each other's expertise.
Yeah.
And you also have to be willing to say, I don't understand what you mean by X.
Well, it also
Explain this to me.
It's kind of the definition of how to build an interesting and deep team, right? You have all these people with different backgrounds that become eventually feeling safe to talk to one another and ask for help and ask for clarification. And once you can kind of kick that door open and you've got people with all these variable backgrounds, you can just go so much deeper than if you have a room full of like-minded people, the same background.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just kind of exciting just talking about it. You think about the possibility with a team like that as opposed to, what you get fed typically.
Yeah,
With
and
people get hired based on the resume criteria, and you get 15 of the same resumes to create a team to fill position X, and that's the way it goes in like 90% of larger corporations or places, because it's just data. You're part of data streaming into the building and then streaming back out. But it's not like that at the smaller level, which is what makes it so exciting.
Right. And creating a culture where someone doesn't have to feel like they can't say, I don't understand what you mean by this. And when I onboard new people, I often say, assume that I think you can read my mind, because I'm not going to tell you everything you need to know, because I started this in this line of work or this platform in 2007.
Yeah.
So, we're 12 years in, so I can't go back to square one. So I expect you to come to me with questions. I'm going to onboard you in a way that I think you can come into the group and get started, but you're going to have to come and figure out what you need to ask.
Like a relay race. Start running before the baton and just keep up. Do your best.
Figure it out.
Well, it works, right? Because then you can see sink or swim too. And if people are willing to put in the work and try to catch up, then they're probably going to do all right. And if they're not, then they're not. You can weed out those folks. The 12 years and moving along, that I'm wondering, so in like the typical startup scenario, you get some funding and you've got a timeline because you've got investors pressuring you to put something out the door, or a smaller business that, like sometimes I like to step outside of entrepreneur because it's too flashy of a term. And I like business owners, just talking to people who have made something happen, right? Mm-hmm. Which could be any size business or any size thing. But so a lot of times they're bootstrapping and they're just, they've got to turn a profit at some point, and that hopefully sooner than later, because otherwise they don't have any money. There's no food on the table, right? Being here, were there grants that were able to help the company to come along, and there's the student population to use? I mean, it sounds like it was quite like a really cool incubator that doesn't, like there's got to be a real benefit to that, where did you have a little bit more room to breathe and to create something right instead of right and ready and just fast out the door?
I think so. And also the research that's done by my research team at Rutgers, where I am now, I'm a full professor at Rutgers, helps undergird the efficacy of the product, which is important.
They're doing research on the product's use itself?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly. And implementation of it and, very interesting one-on-one studies. And it's extremely rich for them.
And
the graduate students that I have, I think, incredible training because of the involvement of this platform, right? They're doing research on this platform, but the conversations that we have as a team writ large are really rich and deep.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. So that research, though, is being done by the Rutgers students. So that's Rutgers research. So it's independent of the company, which is, I can see being beneficial because it's not slanted. It's not the company doing its own research and guiding it. It's scientific research done by an organization that's a respectable organization. And then you can leverage that information to make the product better.
Right, exactly.
So how does that cycle work? How do you, it's a broad question. You can just make it smaller, but you've got a product, but you're iterating it, right? It's always getting better and you're always putting new features into it. Yeah. New bug squashes. So as this research is happening, are there new ideas coming up, new ways to handle problems? Is it solving things you didn't know about 5 years ago? I mean, you said it's 12 years old, right? So it's probably not the same product that it was 12 years ago.
Oh no, but also we started the company the product launch was really about 2015. We started the company in 2012 in order to apply for these small business innovation research grants through the U.S. Department of Education. And Mike Salpedro, the CTO of Apprendis, fronts those grants. He's the PI on those grants because I, as a professor, cannot be the PI on those grants.
What's PI?
Principal investigator.
Okay.
Right. So he and I, we might write those grants. And he sort of bears the brunt of writing them for Apprendis. I write them for our research at the university. But you can see how the tech gets maintained, the technical backbone gets maintained by the company. And when there's a really interesting research question, the technical team at the university might, in a sandbox kind of make a change. And we tinker with that and figure out what is it going to tell us about student learning, about teacher implementation. And those features might, in the end, find their way in. But, these two things run in parallel. Right?
It feels like a really good way to stay curious, too, to stay enjoying the iteration and the journey. So you're a company with customers and operating like a corporation, I assume. But at the same time, you're a little bit outside of that because you've got the higher ed aspect to it with the research going on, where it's kind of like you're chasing something that you're passionate about and you're getting the opportunity to continually drive it forward, which is your background anyway in the education and the cognitive abilities of the people you're interfacing with, right?
Right.
So that's got to, what I'm getting at, I guess, is that's got to feel really freeing, where a lot of people end up, at least in the beginning phase between founding a company and running a company, they end up feeling chased or boxed in, and like they have to react. Where you kind of like opened up your own playground,
right? And I think it works. It works in another way, the way that you're talking about. It works in that way, and we've been very successful at the company in getting small business innovation research grants, which has been really great. And we've also gotten research grants, which has also been great. But the other way that it works is, when you're productizing something, you can't wait for a solution that's going to work 99.99% of the time. You have to be willing to say, don't let the perfect interfere with the good.
Sure.
Right?
Yeah.
That's the famous Voltaire quote. And imagine, and this aspect, frankly, about some things frustrates me in academia and drives me. Because if we had a cure to cancer that worked, 90% of the time, would we say, you know what, we're not going to release it yet. We're going to wait for that other 10%.
I hope they'd release it at 70% or before. I mean,
right?
It's every time it works, it's good.
So the thing is that I think because academia rewards excellence, sometimes that culture can interfere with the development of a product. That being said, our algorithms are highly accurate when compared to human scoring, which we're very proud of, and that's why we have the patents we have and the efficacy data we have, et cetera. But, through that lens, you have to think about taking what you know and turning it into the best product that you can, and then, let basically teachers vote with their feet, right?
Yeah.
And that's, I think, a really important thing. So that partnership, in quotes, between the company and the university works in two ways.
Yeah, I can see that. Do you think just going back to something you said earlier on your team, when you make it safe to ask questions and to not know things, that's something that's come up with most people I talk to, is one of the lessons you end up learning is that failure is okay, but failure followed by action or followed by learning or followed by doing something about that failure, not complacency and that failure is just okay, I'll continue to fail, right? Because there's a difference. Your goal is still to succeed, but you have to, there's some lumps you take along the way that you have to learn that it's okay to fail, where many times that's almost cliche and people say, yeah, of course you've got to fail to succeed, but it's not okay in our culture. And it's people say it, but it's not real. Nobody wants to fail. People don't want to admit they were wrong. And American culture is still much stronger in covering your tracks and not admitting to the failure. But everyone I've talked to that owns a business has just had to become comfortable with it. So it's like you take those knocks and you get used to the failure. Do you think you can help get there with your team because you make that safe environment, or do you think people have to figure that out for themselves?
Well, I think sometimes it's a team effort where we're working on something as a team and testing it and going, oh, this didn't work as expected. Why? We don't think about that as failure, right? But sometimes it's an individual person where, I might be peeling off thinking, okay, I'm really going to, knock my head against a wall for a while and think about this problem and how to solve it. And, it's also, there's a lot of individual differences in how people like to think and like to work. And it's sometimes specific to the piece that they work on. So our user experience, they use a lot of storyboarding, like Cam and Pat Rowan, they use a lot of storyboarding, and Charity Stoudenrouse works with them as well on this, and looking what that visual might look like and how might that impact the student? How might that impact the teacher? Because that is, part of what user experience is. Mike Brigham might write code and say, well, let's see how this is going to work. Let's see how this is going to hang together. And that has a specific kind of path because it's code. For me, I do a lot of drawing. I do a lot of reading, thinking, and the way in which I kind of seem to solve problems is I like to kind of hover around and circle around like a bird. Circle around, and I read really broadly, extremely broadly, and read this and read that from computer science, and read this from interaction journals, and read this from psychology journals, and look at other things, and then I'm like, this is the solution. This is the solution to this problem. Now let's implement it. And I've been able to do that a few times, and I think it's sort of how my mind works. And it's a very creative part of my job that I love. I mean, I love what I do, right?
Clearly. All the things that you do, they all tie together. When I saw you all last, you guys all sat together at WPI, and you've since moved on to Rutgers where you're teaching. How does the company come together? Do you have offices? Do you guys get together once in a while? Is it mostly remote? How are you running things nowadays?
It's mostly remote, but I'm in Massachusetts now. Mike was in DC. We were together last week in DC. So Cam and Mike come down. So it's mostly remote, and we have a whole team meeting every Monday. I had it, in fact, just before you came in, where we keep it, sort of everybody apprised of what's coming up, down the pike.
Okay.
2 weeks and 1 week, and
kind of like a stand-up. Here's where we're at for everybody's responsibilities,
and who needs to do what, and et cetera. Right?
Yeah.
But we're mostly remote. Yeah.
Cool. It seems to be the way of the world. If you're not selling brick and mortar, then promotes so much more time and freedom to actually get things done, as long as you have that discipline to get it done. So what is the company now? There's you three. And then you've got, I noticed on the website, there's some other people. I don't know if they're facilitators or if they're the ones interfacing with teachers. How does it work?
Well, so we have a couple of full-time employees. So we have Jason Kleben, who's an application developer for us. We have Patrick Rowan, who's a graphic designer who works with CAM. We have Charity Stoudenrouse, who was a teacher who in Oregon. She lives in Oregon. Along the lines of this virtual company. And she used our product for 3 years.
No way.
And loved it.
That's awesome.
And basically called us up and said, I love this. I have an idea. Why don't you hire me to onboard teachers? This is what I'd love to do. And she's a rock star of rock star proportions.
That's great. Does she onboard remotely?
Yeah.
That's great. So she'll get on a Skype or a Hangout or whatever method, but take the teacher through how to use the technology and then follow up, have the teacher try it a few times and
Absolutely.
then answer questions.
Yeah. Look at their reports with them. Teachers can call her. She'll even pair teachers together with like, hey, you were working on something like this. And why don't you touch base with that teacher who used our technology for this and such purpose?
How did you do it before her?
We didn't.
Yeah, it makes sense. So
Right?
she had a good idea that came into being. So when you started putting it in classrooms, who was getting the teacher up and running? Who was it? Were you doing it local to the campus and you were talking with the teacher directly?
Yeah, we were. But we were, that was really early on. And so they were all research schools. So we were onboarding them as part of the research process.
Okay.
But onboarding them now is totally different because they're distributed across, as I said, 50 states, right?
Yeah.
So we can't be there. We'd spend our life, in planes, and it doesn't make sense for me because I'm full-time employed somewhere else.
Right. I was going to say, you have another job too.
Right. So, but she does an incredible job onboarding them, and we've developed a lot of materials. So
Yeah. And because the business came to be on the campus, does the school have a stake in the business, or do they sit on the board, or how does that work?
Yeah, they do. They have a small, small stake in the company.
It seems right.
Yeah, absolutely.
They facilitate the creation and they gave you
absolutely,
arguably some great tools to get it going.
Absolutely.
So how does that work? Do they basically hands off? Do they get involved? Are they here to help when you need it? Is it a partner, or is it something that's behind you and it helped at one point and now it's a responsibility?
Well, I think that they were really behind us at one point, and we sort of graduated right beyond that phase. But they're certainly here to help. Todd Keeler in our tech transfer office is always I have him on my cell phone. I'm going to drop by his office this afternoon. He's really great with setting up, people for us to talk to and et cetera. And it's really, we've gotten a lot of help from WPI, which has been really, really wonderful. And Jim Baum and, a variety of people here. Have been really great in the TAN program, the Technology Advisory Network here that we were a part of when I was at WPI.
And the goal ultimately is probably to graduate the company, right? To have you move on and have other companies incubating while you're going off to actually run the business.
Absolutely.
Now, one of the things we talked about before we started recording was the standard response to a professor founder is to get the business launched and then remove them.
Right.
But you're still here in the driver's seat. So I know you wanted to touch on that a little bit, and I'm arguably, I don't know much about that side of it. So that's why I was asking about WPI too. Have you had pressure for that, or is you just kind of did things differently and flipped the script?
Nobody's trying to push me out that I know of.
You probably know.
If you hear something, let me know, will you? I think the logic was in the past, get the professor as CEO out and replace him with, 28-year-old MBA. I'm being a little bit facetious.
Right.
But I think the current thinking in deep technology companies, of which mine is one, is it's a lot easier to take somebody like me and turn me into a CEO than take someone who is a generic MBA and try to turn them into an innovator, because they don't understand really how the innovation really works.
Yeah.
And they're going to want to pivot. I'm willing to pivot, but I only want to pivot when I think it's important to pivot. I'm playing a long-term game. I'm not playing a short-term game. And, I don't want someone taking my baby out of my hands until I'm ready. I will take this company as far as I can.
Yeah.
And so far, I think, by many measures, that's been pretty good.
Yeah.
So,
Sometimes people bring in the CEO-ish business type person to work alongside the innovator, right? Which is supposedly going to free up the innovator.
right.
That doesn't always go as planned either, though, because then sometimes you have different interests, and one's trying to drive one way, one's trying to drive the other way, and who's supposed to be driving the ship. So that's probably not a way. Plus your team is not huge. You're not hundreds or thousands of people yet. You don't need somebody governing how to do all of that, where you can still drive. Because what drives your company right now is the difference, is the product, right? It's what it can actually do in the classroom for kids. So that still comes down to the innovation and to driving that forward, to making progress.
Right.
Yeah. And then, so you've got Inkits and then Ink Blotter.
Yeah.
Is there anything else coming? So Ink Blotter, going back to my earlier question, was that always in the works or always in the plans, or did that come about by seeing a need that you hadn't seen yet and you were like, oh, we can adapt to that as well?
Well, this is an interesting question, right, about being in real classrooms. On one hand, yes, the students are getting real-time support, but teachers also need to, when they're getting that assessment report, looking at, this many number of my students are floundering, right? How do I help them all? You're one teacher. And in Oregon, you could have 50 kids. You're one
50?
teacher. 50, because you can have up to 50 kids in Oregon.
50.
Right. So how does the teacher help them? So, just sitting around the whiteboard one day, we came up with the idea of an alerting dashboard that's governed by the same algorithms. And so the teacher's getting real-time alerts. And the teacher can decide how to have that displayed. So it could be individual students as they happen, or it could be like, give me a class-wide alert. Tell me when this percentage of my class is floundering on this skill because I want to stop them. And that aspect has been completely transformative in terms of how teachers implement these next generation science standards.
I can see that being game-changing. It even can sound simple, but the ability to say, the overwhelming percentage of the class is having trouble with this. Let's just stop and start at this point again.
Right.
And that,
Well, I'll give you a perfect example. We work very closely with a teacher named Nancy Foote in Arizona. And I remember many years ago now getting an email from her saying, I'd like to talk to you about your software. And I thought, oh no, I want to hear the bad news, right? So I called her up and I said, what did you want to tell me? And she said, I had no idea that students didn't know how to run controlled trials where they change only one thing at a time. She said, I thought that they were having difficulty interpreting data, but in fact, their data were not interpretable because they were confounded. She said, I had no idea what percentage of kids were actually having trouble, collecting unconfounded data. So unless you have technology like ours, you're actually not going to be able to glean that.
Well, it goes back to what you said earlier when you're onboarding new people. Just expect to read the mind and ask me what you don't know, because that's a problem in every walk of life. But all we can do without that data is infer based on our own experiences what we think is happening in that person's head. And that's
right. And we are in the era of accountability in education. Rightly or wrongly, and that's a separate conversation. But, teachers have to provide measures of competency on these next generation science practices. So you don't want this to be a pass-fail. You want it to be, how well can they formulate questions? How well can they collect data? How well can they interpret data? How well can they write about those data once they have them? Mm-hmm. Those are different competencies, right? How well can they apply the math equations underlying science, which is a new thing being developed by the company, not by me, actually, by Mike and Cam are really driving this aspect of it.
Nice.
And so what's interesting about that is that, for accountability purposes, teachers need this. For funding purposes, for example, if under the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the last thing President Obama enacted before he left, schools need to be able to demonstrate how they've used their funds from the government.
Right.
So this provides a perfect measure for districts to, send into the state to send into the Fed, saying this is exactly what we did. We, used this science software, and look how it moved the needle for many children, some of whom are, have left the regular science classroom to go to a resource science classroom for special ed, and then moved back to the regular science classroom because they've used our stuff for 6 months. Back to the regular science classroom. This is amazing.
It's sort of the best case scenario for a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because the government has these grants to try to improve education, and you have to prove that you're using them. And by proving that you're using them and that it's moving the kids forward, you're making the innovations that make the education work better to then get the next grant to make the next piece of progress. So it's powerful. It's really, I'm glad to see that that's happening, because for a long time, education has been pretty stagnant. And the whole e-tech firm or field in e-learning and all of that, that's how we came to know each other, was through just the general field of e-learning and trying to figure out, what's next in tech and how can people learn better. I feel like it started to get some real attention, when higher ed started to get a little bit disrupted through the online MOOCs and the things that were coming up. But I feel like it's cooled off a little bit, where it's not, it was when edX came out, and it was talked about a lot in mainstream. And now it's probably, seems like it's shrunk back down to the people that are actually innovating in the space and working in it, that are doing it. But that makes it feel like there's not a lot happening if you're outside of it. So it's good to talk with people to know there's still government programs that are looking into it, because I think the government programs frees up the ability to work on the problem instead of the ability to chase the next funds. Which is
correct.
Yeah. So, and that's what I want to believe is happening, especially in education, where I've got young kids that are being educated.
Yeah. And just a sidebar about MOOCs and a sidebar about online resources. That can be very democratizing, and that's part of the rationale for them. However, if someone is unmotivated as a learner, are they really going to sit there and listen?
No, absolutely not. For sure, no. What's their completion rate?
The rate of completion of MOOCs is abysmal.
Yeah,
it's abysmal.
I think
It was a financial. It was a financial decision as well, because it made higher education cheaper. Right. This is part of a longer conversation, but I was never really that positive about MOOCs, because if you really want to train, science literacy writ large, there's going to be people who are going to not do well in a MOOC.
Oh, for sure.
Right.
For sure, yeah.
Now, technology that can gather what students are doing in real time, react to what they're doing in real time, that's fundamentally different from a MOOC.
Yeah, well, people are different. So you need to have solutions that work for different types of learners. That's one of the greatest flaws we have in the education system, is it teaches
one size
away, right? Hoping that everybody will keep up. So you obviously have really bright people that are left behind, as well as really, really bright people that are struggling. It's
for different reasons. Right. You don't even know what they are.
Right. It's tough though, because you flip the script and ask, well, then what's the solution? And that's a tough answer. People don't have the answer, right? Kind of like with healthcare. Yeah, we're not doing it right. So what's the answer? I don't know.
Right.
That's a big question. It's complicated. So, you mentioned a couple of times, and I want to go back to, you're now at Rutgers living in New Jersey, and you and the team work remotely from Oregon to New Jersey to Massachusetts to Washington, and you're still a professor. So what does that mean? That's a lot to balance. You got to be pretty busy.
Yeah, I think I have 100,000 unanswered emails right now.
100,000?
I'm not being facetious.
Just hit delete.
It's like 100,000. So, that's a little bit of a challenge.
Well, presumably, I know that you've got kids, and I know that you've got a social life. So life keeps moving along with businesses, right? So how are you doing?
How am I managing?
Well, not just how you're managing. How are you doing with 2 jobs plus a life to lead? How do you internalize that? How do you personalize it and make it work for you?
Well, so how do I make it work for me? That's a really good question.
Most people,
if I could answer that question, that would probably be the best business model. Well, first of all, the team that I have, that we have, is not to be believed. They are the dream team. I consider myself so lucky to have this team. And I'm able to offload a lot of things to Cameron, to Mike, to Charity, who, I'm a full-time professor, so they need to handle certain things for me. And then there'll be certain things where they say, you know what, we need your eyes on this. And, I also, because we have this weekly meeting, I know when I have to scratch a little deeper and go, well, wait, what did you base that on?
It's wonderful you have the trust too.
Right. You have to have that trust. You can't move forward if you don't have that. So I offload a lot of work to people who are incredibly competent, really, like incredibly competent. And so there's that. And the other part is this is my passion, right?
Right.
This is my legacy, really. And when all is said and done, this will be this and the 3 kids that I produced are the mark that I made. I'm using that in quotes because, I didn't cure cancer. But, if we could teach every student, middle school and a high school student, how to do scientific inquiry in a really deep way, we would have done something very significant.
Well, Johnny, the one struggling from our conversation like an hour ago, Johnny, by getting the help he needs, might proceed where Johnny could be that bright guy we were talking about that gets left behind. If Johnny doesn't get left behind, Johnny might cure cancer. Right. And that theoretically could happen because of the product helping him be taught properly by his teacher who didn't know he needed extra help in that way. And that's why I love talking to people that run businesses, because we're not all working on cancer, but you don't know the ripple effect. And if you're just doing what you do as the best you can, you're going to make that dent, that mark, and maybe on society or maybe just on something that one day marks society.
Right. Yeah.
I think that's...
I feel very uniquely is a funny word, but the combination of my background and where I think I'm strong, I think makes me very well suited for what I've done. So,
yeah.
And
but it's still,
funny,
it can't be easy to juggle the family and 2 jobs, 2 arguably full-time jobs. Do you employ any strategies to do so? Are you a strict scheduler, or have you built the flexibility into both I don't know how it works, contract with Rutgers, or the way that your teaching schedule is there, plus the way that you've designed Apprendis so that it can operate around the way that you want to lead your life? And if that question isn't clear, I can tell you what I mean.
Yeah, well, so, most universities have an arrangement with professors that they can consult 1 day a week. So, and there's a recognition that, that's really beneficial to keep yourself current, to work on real world problems, to involve students in, to keep you fresh for students. So I adhere by that rule, right? But I also spend a lot of time, talking with Mike and Cam, almost daily, really, about things. Hey, I had an idea. Hey, what'd you think of this? What happened in that school today? And, I could be driving. I commute 40 minutes to, 40 miles to work each way. And so I spent a lot of time just talking with them, talking with Charity. What happened in this school today? Why do you think that is? Set up a call with the teacher. I want to talk to them. Those are the things that I do to make the platform better, that impact both the research, that impact the product. So everything, I think, dovetails really well together. That being said, it's an incredibly busy life.
Well, it has to be too, because again, I'm outside of the EDU environment, so I don't know, but you've always been a research professor too, which means you have a number of research projects going on at any time, right? And that's like real research, quantifiable research, whereas some teachers do not. They teach a subject, right? They go into a classroom and they teach what they teach, and that's the end of their responsibility. Am I wrong in thinking that the research is additional on top of teaching students? That's extra work?
Well, are you wrong? Writing grants is very arduous.
It's another thing that takes up time.
Yeah, you need grants to get research dollars to do the research. So all told, I don't know if it would be accurate for me to say I spend more time working than professors who only teach, because it
depends how they teach and how they prepare. Yeah, that's not what I mean. I'm not comparing better or worse. I'm just saying, do you spend time in classroom teaching students?
Oh, absolutely.
So arguably, it would be comparable to someone who is a non-research professor. That's what I'm trying to figure out. I'm trying to figure out if you have the same 24 hours in a day as everybody else, how are you structuring it to balance the company, the full-time professor gig, and life outside of that?
Right.
Right. Yeah. And is it, you play it by ear week by week, or do you have a structure that helps
I have a structure
to govern it all?
Yeah, I'm a pretty structured person. But by that, I kind of wake up at the same time every day, and I kind of go to bed at the same time every day. And I always eat lunch at my desk. I often eat dinner at my desk. But, it's a rare day, a handful of times a month, I would say, that I eat lunch and dinner at my desk. But, that's not such a sacrifice.
No, it's not even that odd today's day.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right.
What do your kids think about the businesses? What are they? How deep do they go into understanding what it is you do? Are they more? Do they more identify you as the founder, CEO, or the professor?
I think they think of me as a professor, but I think they know I have a company and whatever. So I don't know how deeply they understand what I do. Maybe a little bit more now. My youngest is turning 20, so I don't have children at home. So that helps a little bit.
Do either of them share your interests? Like, would this legacy ever go that route, or do they have different career aspirations?
Yeah, so I have three, 29, 24, and almost 20. It's interesting to say that. I don't foresee that happening, but you never know, right? Stranger things have happened,
sure,
right? The thing about a learning company is that everybody's learned something. So on one level, most people can relate to it. Wow, hey, I had to learn. I remember some of us, or most of us, have always struggled learning something or other, right? So they're kind of like, oh, that's kind of neat. Most people think what we do is pretty neat because they have learned something and have struggled to learn something.
Yeah, I have.
Right?
And I often think about stuff I've struggled with when I was younger, and if I could just go back and, it sounds corny, but if I could just go back and ask and not be worried about raising your hand or, be concerned with that, then it wasn't something that I was hindered by, meaning like I didn't have any disability or that's something that I couldn't learn. I just might have had questions I didn't ask because I didn't want to be the kid asking the questions. But, if you accumulate all those instances over your entire schooling career, you could probably move forward a lot faster if you didn't have to worry about that, and you could actually get the questions answered.
Yeah, and recognizing that learning is hard work. It takes work, right? We used to have this kind
of, a
lot of people have this view like you're smarter, you're not. Well, no, it's not that easy.
Right. But the school does make kids feel that way too, the way it's structured in today's day, where, like we said, it teaches one way and everyone has to try and toe that line. So some kids end up feeling dumb that might be quite bright just because that's not how they learn. They have a different aptitude, or they're the next Van Gogh instead of being
right, or they're really processing something different, right? So think about like when you're asking them comprehension questions, but they're really low level recall questions, and they're reading a paragraph and then they have to answer these very low level questions when they could actually be making really deep inferences, which is a much higher level task.
Yeah, and I don't obviously know to the depth that you do, but I can see it just in my kids' elementary classrooms. I can see the way that they're lucky enough to have had great teachers that really care. But there's the curriculum that the teacher has to teach, and then there's the issues or the where places that your kid excels, and you can see that where they're stronger, where they're not as strong. But you can't necessarily fill the gap, and the teacher can't either. She or he is willing to work on it, and at home, we can work on it. But essentially, you either catch up to that one thing, whether or not it's relevant to your kid, or you're left behind on it. That's just the way it's going to go, and that's kind of disheartening.
Well, that's why this software is so useful for teachers, because they're like, wow, 70% of my class are struggling at this. Stop the class in real time. And they love it.
I'm sure they do, because I have yet to meet a teacher who doesn't seem to care. It's more they're up against something that they can't push back against, meaning that the whole system and, MCAS and, like you said, bigger discussion or different discussion. But there's a whole system in place, and that's the system that gives them their job. They have to do it, but that's not the way they would do it if left to their own.
Right.
Yeah, and that's what made me interested in e-learning to begin with, just ways to facilitate better or more diverse learning of the same materials to make learning more fun for people. Because I didn't realize till I was older, I was a typical kid that was fairly bright. School didn't really interest me because there was never really a challenge there. I'm talking at the lower levels, getting into college and stuff. There was plenty of challenge, but so it wasn't that interesting. And I thought I didn't like learning. I love learning, but it wasn't until I found challenges and really I feel like I got the challenge later in life, and it would have been fun to be challenged from an earlier point.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
I don't know how to do that though. But that's where you guys come to be as a company.
Right.
Right. So in running the company, right? So you've been doing it for a number of years now. This is something I like to ask everyone. What would you say you didn't expect? Like, what would you say was an aha or something you didn't see coming in regards to running a business? And I'll just tell you, mine was people. It's really difficult to interface with and to develop people, harder than you would think. People don't just do whatever you want, and they can't read your mind. And there's more work to developing a good team than I thought going into things.
So the question is, what's surprising about running a business? I think how hard it is to, get a business off the ground, and that was surprising to me. And I feel like I've done some hard things in my life, but this has really been the hardest thing that I've done. Because
there's no really off the ground, right? You don't just get off the ground once and now you're flying with no turbulence and everything's going to be perfect. There's ups, there's downs, there's challenges. There's
right.
That's one thing that comes up with everybody again is you have to learn basically how to continue starting your business constantly because there's always the ups and downs and the challenges. And
right, and especially when it's a digital resources, and there's a ton of people producing digital resources, some of which are good and some of which are terrible. Mm-hmm. So you really have to be constantly knowing what's happening, what's coming down the pike, right?
Not just that, but you have to have the mental fortitude to keep getting back up when something either didn't go right or the market changed. It's completely something independent of your company, but now you have to switch something or pivot that you didn't expect to do.
Right. And knowing when to pivot, right? So,
mm-hmm.
We interview a lot of teachers, and, a lot of teachers say, oh, it would be great if we had this, it would be great if you had that, et cetera, et cetera. Well, you can't add absolutely every feature because then your product won't be a cohesive product. Mm-hmm. You need to scale it. Right. And that scalability has to do with the core. What are the core features that a large percentage of the population are going to want?
Right.
And that's not a trivial thing. Right.
Right. What else do you have on your radar?
What else do I have on my radar?
Like, do you think you'll be a professor for a long time to come? Do you have other aspirations with the company? Do you have more products that you want to roll out underneath the Apprendis umbrella?
The funny thing about being and maybe academics don't feel this way. Maybe, I'm unique in this respect, probably not. But I sometimes think, I guess those are my ideas. I don't think I have another good idea in me. And then something clicks and I go, wow, I think that's a really good idea. I think I have a good idea. So we also have patents in eye tracking, and that I developed here at WPI with Ermal Toto, who works here at WPI, and he was a former graduate student. And when I went to Rutgers, he decided to stay here. And so one of the things one might think about as technology gets more and more sophisticated is integrating, the eye tracking with, InKids. Because how valid an assessment is it if the students are not even looking where they need to be looking?
Right, or at the screen at all.
Yeah.
So what would you use, the webcam to track the eye movement?
Yeah, you could do that.
And then just, how else would you do it?
Well, you could use an eye tracker, which is a little piece of equipment that would track their eyes. And then what our patent talks about is, if Johnny doesn't understand convection, and he gets into this, what we call a micro world, where there's some text on convection and then there's a simulation, and he's skipping over the section on convection, you could say, hey, Johnny, you should really read that, and then go click on the play button and watch the convection currents form to help him develop what we call a mental model, a rich mental model of what happens. Right?
So then it's just monitoring basically the eye tracker understands the way the page was created visually, so it knows the way you need to work through the page. So if you're not spending a certain amount of time on one place, it'll be like, hey, John.
Well, yeah, that's a proxy, right? That's a proxy for it. Because when people are doing deep processing, they tend to slow down at spots where there's really rich causal information in science. So I've done a number of empirical studies that show this, right? So if you know they don't have that prior knowledge and they don't slow down at all, you could probably prompt them to do it.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Prompt them to look at the simulation. I mean, when you have a digital book, people don't really know that you're supposed to use the diagram, kind of in tandem with the text. Even, students looking at a book don't know that.
Right. Well, that's another thing with the software is you can get a lot more tangible than you can with a book. The book, it's really easy to fall out of, but you can keep things moving with the software. So that's got to be helpful too.
Right. It's got to be tracking the right things. It's got to be tracking at the right level.
Where do you pull the curriculum to use in the software? Is it?
We develop it all, but
no kidding.
Everything we built is handmade by us.
So does the school system have to buy into that curriculum too, or is there like a licensing that makes it fair?
Well, we don't have a curriculum. We have a set of like assessment modules, right? That are supplementary to the curriculum. So if the school has adopted the next generation science standards or various state frameworks that look a lot like the next generation science standards, ours is designed as a standalone to go as an assessment with any curriculum.
And can the teacher create assessments within it? So if there was a curriculum they're teaching?
Not really. I mean, people often ask that question, but the truth of the matter is very few teachers want to do that.
So is it grade based? How do you know what to be feeding the children in order to address their skills? Is it based on what an eighth grader is learning at that time in approved curriculum?
Right. So, there's these standards called the next generation science standards and the competencies they're expected to have mastered or achieved. And then we're logging what they're doing in real time. And then our algorithms are scoring them on those competencies as to whether they're competent or not.
Yeah. Okay. So that's a clear way for me to understand it, where I wasn't sure if you could actually wrap your software around the curriculum. So throughout the whole year, with any given day, you could be sort of applying this method where the teacher's getting, updates that the kid needs help, or if it's coming at a testing phase or a phase where you're finding out what they know.
So teachers are using it when it's most practical for them to use it and most useful. So sometimes that's before the unit. Sometimes it's the end of the unit. Sometimes that's for MCAS prep.
Yeah, and when they can plan to be able to jump in and monitor how the kids are working,
or sometimes it's halfway through the unit. So they're doing a unit on density. Okay, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to figure out exactly who needs the most help, what help they need, etc. I'm going to, give this to kids to remediate. We've improved state scores for many schools where they say we changed nothing but added your platform, and our scores went up 20% on the standardized science test.
Just because they can dig in and find out where the kids actually need the extra work.
The help. Yeah.
I mean, that makes complete sense. If you just uncover where the weakness is, you can address it.
I mean, our software has also been shown empirically to transfer, which is really the brass ring in learning, right? You want to be able to teach something to somebody that they can transfer to the next thing. So we've shown very robust transfer even 180 days later. So, we're training them in one topic of science with Rex, our digital agent. We drop Rex out, and then we test them, say, 40 days later, 80 days later, 120 days later, 170 or 180 days later, and show that students still know the practices that they learned in this one context, and we've moved them to a different science topic, and they can still apply them.
Because
we taught them something.
Right, yeah, they're getting a handle on their thinking as opposed to just the information.
They're you're teaching a man to fish, right?
Yeah.
You're teaching them how to conduct inquiry, which is what we want. These are the practices of science that we want students to know.
And that shows real promise. That has to feel good from your seat. That's got to feel good to see that it's not just helping a kid pass a test, but it's helping that kid understand information and to process it and to move forward as a better version of themselves, because knowledge is power.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's a feel good legacy.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thanks.
Yeah, sure. We're over an hour. It goes fast. It's always like a time warp. Do you have anything else you want to talk about? I don't want to hold you all day.
No, I guess, just in the realm of, what are you willing to do for a business?
Sure.
And I was just on a panel last week at the U.S. Department of Education, and they asked about, how do you know, and how do you decide if you're willing to do this, or, I answered. I was the only woman on the panel, and I would say, regardless of whether you're a woman or a man, but know what you're willing to sacrifice, and know what you're not willing to sacrifice. Mm-hmm. And make your decisions accordingly. That's just good life lesson, from the elders.
It is. That can apply. I mean, that applies to more than just starting a business too, right? Because there's a lot of people that sacrifice quite a bit for a standard 9 to 5. And I don't mean to put anybody in a box, because first of all, I don't think everybody should be an entrepreneur or found a business. It's not for everybody. Some people excel at doing things that create bigger pictures and companies. And by no means am I saying entrepreneur is a step up. It's just a different way to walk your life. But if you do know what you're willing to sacrifice, a lot of people sacrifice different aspects of their life for a regular job. With entrepreneurship, I think you do have to go into it knowing where you're willing to make those sacrifices, but you get to decide too. You can carve out how it's going to make those sacrifices and how it'll affect your life. And I think that's really empowering.
Right.
That to me, that's always been one of the special things about owning a business is, I'm going to be available while I'm on vacation. I'm going to, but it's not that I can't take a vacation. It's just that I don't disappear. I never
Right.
disappear for 2 weeks. I might be on vacation, but I'm going to be available if something happens. But by that exact same token, I'm at all my kids' practices. I'm at the Cub Scout meetings. I'm present. I get home and my phone's gone until they go to bed, at which point I could work till 1 a.m. if I want. I can get back to work, and I'm not saying work doesn't come into personal life, because it definitely does. But I have very firm grounds on where it's not allowed. And I couldn't do that if I was answering to somebody else.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely, yeah.
So that's one way that I find, yes, I make a lot of sacrifices, but I also have tremendous benefit to my life and the way that I want to lead it, because I can design that story.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I don't want to live a 9 to 5 life. That's not really for me. That's not who I am. Mm-hmm. And I have a mind that's very, very active. Like when I'm in a period of extreme sort of trying to work on a problem, I go to bed with a pencil and paper. I wake up in the night, write notes.
Oh yeah, I do that too.
I send myself emails. Because, when I'm in a highly creative time, my mind is always working on something.
Yeah.
Right?
You don't seem like you are or could be 9 to 5 either. That's what I was digging at with some of the questions about the multiple jobs and balancing it with life. And it seems like you wear all the hats all day long, and there's a sort of a dance where sometimes you're a professor, and then between probably one part of professor during this day and the next professor part, there's the CEO that's doing her duties from here to here, and then mom at this time, and
Right.
there's a lot that gets stitched together over that time, and that's how I am too. And that's
Right.
that some people would hate that, absolutely hate that, because it's too crazy, it's too much of a dance. But for me, I love the freedom that it entails.
Yeah, I love that. And I also am able to say to somebody, I have some great students, Rachel Dickler and Amy Adair and Mariel O'Brien. And I'll say to them, hey, I need some intel on this, because I have an idea for a proposal. Do a Google search and find me this. Mm-hmm. And then I might say, okay, read these things and do a little pre-processing for me. And, they might give me something, and then I want to read about it. And that's great to get that pre-processing and, get different people's perspective on things,
For sure.
You have to sort of know where you're looking. You can't say, oh, just go to this journal and open it up and start reading stuff,
For sure.
So the thing is, you always have to have your arms around what's going on in the world, especially now with AI. We're in an AI-based business. So with AI, you have to really have your mind on what's going on in AI.
Yeah. And it's hard to get a bead on where AI is, because very different prominent people have a very different opinion of even where it exists at this point, and
Right.
whether or not it exists,
Right.
or when it's going to exist,
Right.
So, and how you're going to define it, because
Right.
some people, when they talk about AI, they're just talking about like an intelligent machine or something that can change based on a user's performance, whereas some are talking about a sentient being, right?
Right,
That's
right.
not the same thing.
Right.
That's another whole interesting thing. But before, or if we go there, you mentioned having these great people to access, and that's something that I think one area, we're pretty remote as well, where most people are in different locations. And I think it's great for 80% of things. The one thing I miss, and I find other ways to get it done, but I miss the in-person brainstorming. Do you feel that you have that because of the campus and maybe seeing, Cam, Mike, and the people regularly enough? Do you feel like you have that? Because I do feel sometimes without planning it, it's nice to just grab people in a room and a whiteboard and start talking about an issue.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I miss that part of the whiteboard and the conversation. But I think with us, because we worked so closely for so many years before I moved, you can kind of pick up right where you left off, so to speak.
Yeah, for sure. You just miss that spontaneity of pulling everyone in a room and doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can kind of do it now where like we'll have everybody on a screen and you can see faces and be engaged. And it's way better than it used to be. Like that's better than a conference call. It's certainly better. But I still prefer, if possible, this. Like I can see you. We can look at each other and have the conversation. And that conversation can go a lot deeper into entirely new places than when you're 1,000 miles away. It's just, it's still not the same.
I'm constantly drawing and writing when I'm talking. And I've not surprisingly not done that in this conversation, but that's maybe because we talked a little bit before about the kinds of things we were going to talk about, but I'm always drawing and boxes and, pushing things out into diagrams. And that's what I miss is the ability to do that. But I sometimes do that and then I scan it and send it or show it on my phone and say, okay, this is what I'm talking about. What do you think?
Yep.
Right?
I do it too for the poor people that I send it to trying to decipher it. But I think if deciphering it alone, I'll never do it. But once we can talk through together, it sort of helps me to communicate what I'm thinking where words might not get us there. So what we're describing with the boxes and I don't just take like neat notes. It's like a mind map, and I don't mean that in a fancy, beautiful mind kind of way. I mean it's a dump onto a piece of paper of whatever I'm thinking about and how things might be connected, and but it ends up making more sense when you can step back and see the whole thing.
You're using the paper to offload working memory.
Yeah. Right. So you do the same way.
Absolutely.
Because not everybody does. Some people take really neat notes, and I've always been slightly envious of that, but I never understood. Like that's not how it comes out of my head.
Right. And I mean, I think the people who take really neat notes, no slam against them, but I think they're putting notes down so that later they can do the higher level reasoning. Or maybe not the high level reasoning. They're sort of copying verbatim, which is not copying verbatim does not instill deep thinking.
No,
we know that.
Right. They could just be a different thinker too.
A lot of assessment focuses on rote recall, which, just because you can recall something doesn't mean you know it. Right?
No, certainly
especially
not.
In science,
Right. And there's different types of thinking too, where
Absolutely.
I've always been more creative and innovative. I don't mean those in cliche words to mean better. It's just I'm a good idea person, where some people are far better at implementation and they're better at wrapping that idea in reality than I am. And that's a different kind of brain, different kind of thinker.
Well, I think, intelligence is a more current definition of intelligence is what are you able to do with what you know? And if you think about it that way, then you're a highly intelligent person.
Well, I don't know about that, but at least I get to talk to highly intelligent people. That's the fun part for me. I get to hear from all kinds of people and with very, very different walks of life and very different backgrounds and hear how it all comes together. And there's, like I've said twice since we've been talking, there's always, I don't want to say always, but always so far, there's always these lessons that come back which go around that whole failure and sort of picking yourself back up. Not related to the failure, but there's don't be afraid to mess up because you have to mess up and break a few eggs, but also the bumpy ride. It's a lot of people that have never run a business, I think, toil over getting the perfect business plan and the perfect idea and figuring out everything perfect in order to start their business. And that's why most of them never do. They never start the business. And if they just knew what we've all learned the hard way, that just take that step, get things moving, because your business plan is going to fall apart. Even if it works, the next year it's going to fall apart and you need a new idea or, an adaptation to what it was that you're doing to move that business forward. And you just have to get the momentum and start rolling forward to get that move. I don't think that people hear that enough. I think it's almost, if you're the person with an idea and you're Googling how to start a company or how do I, own a business or any of that, almost all the information you're going to get is about your business plan and do these 5 things to start your business. Right. Almost none of the advice comes from people that have founded or run businesses, which is like, I have a, in my education, I have a background in entrepreneurship too. And I had a great education, but you do have to think that 90% of my education came from people who were never entrepreneurs. And that's why it's really different to talk to people who maybe don't have any of that background in reading the books about what they're supposed to do, but they ran a $10 million, multinational corporation and they have a lot of good advice to give that you might not find it in books, and you probably won't. And that's been like really, really eye-opening and freeing to me. And I want to help people get that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. No, I think you're right. And if you asked 50, I think I said this earlier, but if you ask 50 people how to proceed, you get 50 different, ideas about how to proceed or what's the most important thing, right? What's the most important thing? That's what I found really fascinating about business, because it's a really ill-defined problem.
Sure, because I can tell you the most important thing, but that comes from me. No, but that comes from me. I mean, the most important thing would have been from my experience in my company, which is wholly unrelated to you and what you're doing. And that's why you have to, talk to as many people as you can, get advice. But I think rather than, because I've seen it so many times. I went to school at a school based in entrepreneurship. So there's, a cohort of people, and all of them with an interest in entrepreneurship, or they wouldn't be there. They wouldn't have gone to that place, right? But I'd say 95% weren't and aren't entrepreneurs and don't own businesses. So I have to think that if that group is still held back and not moving forward, then the people who aren't already self-identifying as wannabe entrepreneurs or aren't taking that step, there's a lot of walls that are self-imposed just because you're waiting for doing what all the people tell you you're supposed to do.
Well, and I also, just as you're saying that, I'm thinking about some people who want to be entrepreneurs because they, like their capital E, they want to be entrepreneurs. I didn't want to be an entrepreneur. I saw a need, there was interest, there was funding. It was interesting to me. I thought, okay, I'm going to do this, right? So when you asked about what's next, right, it's not like I'm going to go off and start, a yoga studio because I want to be an entrepreneur. I want to make this product, scalable, and I want it to be in the hands of a large number of teachers and students, because this is the need, this is my legacy, and this is the thing that I wanted to do. But that's different from being not just an entrepreneur who is, business plan after business plan executing, right? Oh, right. Now I own a restaurant. Now I own a this. Now I own a that.
Right.
Now I do
to
this.
them, the sport is just the creating of the business.
That's not what I'm about.
No, you're more about the value that the company provides,
right?
Having existed.
So social entrepreneurship too, which I think is important with respect to user base, and we have a very, very large user base now.
I'm glad that social entrepreneurship's getting more of the attention it deserves. People are starting to think through their companies and the impact it has, as well as the good that it can do.
Right, because impact is important. I mean, let's think about K-12 education has the potential to be the great equalizer, right?
Mm-hmm. So, or it can hinder entire generations.
Right. So when you think about it that way, it's a very, very important aspect of our lives. Everybody goes to school.
It's a huge aspect. And I mean, look at the amount of years that's dedicated to it. I mean, it's all of your formative years are spent being educated.
Right.
I mean, not that education stops, but I mean, formally sitting in a classroom, it's not even your choice. There's a law. You have to go there.
Right.
So if we're going to mandate it, but we're not going to optimize it, like you're saying, we can go a number of different ways here. Shouldn't we go the best way for everybody to move the society forward? Right. I mean, just makes sense. You touched on something that I like to talk about. A lot of times people start businesses based on seeing an opportunity, and they fill that opportunity. And that's kind of the entrepreneur you're talking about. I can make a buck here. I could do this there. Other people start a business based on their passions or their something they're very very interested in, like a yoga studio, someone who just wants to teach yoga because of what yoga's done for their life. You're lucky enough to tap the both, right? I mean, have you internalized how lucky it is that there's an opportunity, there's some government-backed agencies that are willing to help bring it to life, and it's something that you love?
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Right? What's a SWOT analysis, right? They call this in business, right? Strength, weaknesses, opportunity, threats. I think that I am I don't believe in luck, first of all. That's just a philosophical statement. But I consider myself really fortunate to be at this point in education, in AI, at this point in my career, at this point in my life, to have met the partners that I have in my business, Mike and Cam, and to have taken on the team that I have to do the work that I do. I mean, what could be better than that?
That's awesome.
Short of being a rock star. Being a rock star might be a really good idea.
Yeah, or athlete. Top level athlete's a pretty good way to live too.
That's too much work. I don't want to spend that much time in the gym.
Well, it depends on which sport you pick. I mean, golf's not an entirely bad way to live. You know, you tour the world, you play golf. A lot of people pay a lot of money to play golf. It depends. But if you're a hockey player, that hurts.
Yeah,
it's going to take a toll on your life. I think unless you have something else you want to dig into, that's a great place to end it on how fortunate some of us are. I mean, I agree. There's no luck behind it. You know, we didn't walk into it.
Well, there's a little luck, but I don't believe in luck. I don't believe in fate. I don't tend to believe in those things. What I believe in is me. I believe in me. The greatest predictor of my future is me. Mm-hmm. And, if you take that on, that can be very heavy too, because it's like, oh, am I doing this right? Am I doing that right? What should I do? And then you can perseverate on that.
Yep.
Get a little neurotic about it.
Or a lot neurotic.
Everybody keep their comments to themselves about that. But if you really believe that you are the one who has the reins of your own life, and then you make the decision every day to steer it this way and steer it that way, it's extremely empowering.
It's very empowering. And I think I feel bad for a lot of people that don't seem to get that or internalize that. Like people with the victim mentality, you see it all the time. And I never really get into it with people because, you are who you decide to be. But the choosing to be successful, like you're saying, that also means owning everything else. And if you're wasting time or you're wasting this or you're doing the wrong thing, and you can't look at yourself and own it and say, I got to change that, or I got to do this differently, or I got to do something better. That's the discipline and the self-reflection that most people, I don't want to say most people, but a lot of people that I'm familiar with don't want to do, because it's the hard work. It's the looking at the parts of yourself that you might not like.
Right.
And then coming to terms with them and saying, which ones can I address? How do I want to address that? There's a big difference between people that design who they want to be and they become those people, or the people who sit there and say, people should like me for who I am, or, this people don't change. I am what I am. As soon as I start to hear those arguments, I don't need to continue on because I already know where you stand.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think it's not silly to imagine your future Wikipedia page. Imagine where you want to go, and then go there. Mm-hmm.
And look at the people that inspire you. What do they do? What are some things about them that is a thing they're doing that you admire and you're not doing?
Right.
Whether or not that's discipline, or whether or not it's related to your family or your fitness or your business or whatever it might be. Right. Fill that gap in.
And stuff's going to happen, but you can say, okay, well, the next time this happens, I'm going to know how to circumnavigate it. I mean,
yeah, and
that's what's important.
You don't have to be perfect. We're not, I'm not talking about fulfilling a Tony Robbins type destiny. But if you're not willing to take a hard look at yourself and move forward, then there's only you to blame when a year goes by and nothing has changed. You're in the same position, and that's a lot. That's not going to get you owning a business. That's not going to move you towards your goals. Even if owning a business is not your goal, but if your goal is to be more active with your kids, or to be more fit, or to move forward in your position, your job, and whatever it is that you do, if you're not willing to look at why you're not, then you're not going to.
Right.
If it's, well, I deserve it, someone should promote me, someone should do this, someone should do that. And there's a lot of that out there. And it doesn't work.
That does not work.
No. Yes. All right. On that note,